Labdien, tere päevast, laba diena. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Baltic launch of the revised OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises, which are considered to be the international standard for good governance of state-owned enterprises. They were globally launched in Paris only a month ago, and we are very lucky that the next audience to learn about the new standard is this audience. So thanks. If you don't know me, someone else. So I'm Rytis Ambrazevičius, president of the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance. So first, I would like to start with a sincere thanks to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Then we will use the short abbreviation, OECD, as well as the State Chancellery of Latvia for organizing this event and creating this opportunity. And as the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance is the third organizer, I thank you all too, on behalf of all of us, for being here and for your interest in improving the Baltic SOE's governance. And finally, I would like also to thank Latvian state enterprise Altum for hosting this today in this beautiful hall. But perhaps the one to welcome you best would be the Prime Minister of Latvia, Evika Siliņa.
Dear distinguished guests, state-owned companies are owned by our citizens, which means they bear greater responsibility in explaining their objectives to the public. This responsibility is especially important during times of economic uncertainty. Good corporate governance builds trust among investors, supports the IPO process, and fosters confidence among the public and stakeholders. It also contributes to sustainable economic growth and environmental protection in the future. We have undertaken a number of reforms to strengthen the corporate governance. Following my proposal 2 weeks ago, the Parliament of Latvia has approved the division of state-owned companies into groups based on funding sources. The law also mandates the preparation of a shareholders' letter of expectation before developing a strategy of the business development. My government has signed an agreement with business organizations on the implementation of the principles of good corporate governance with the aim of promoting economic growth and innovation. Together, we have the opportunity to set an example of excellence in governance, one that will inspire trust, attract investments, and benefit of all people in Latvia. I look forward to continuing our collective efforts to achieve these goals.
Thanks. So before we will start and continue, I would like to ask to provide the information regarding the submitting of the questions for those that are in this nice room and for those that are watching us on the live stream. And here is the slido.com. You have to go there and then enter our event code. Very simple to remember. OECD. Or you can scan this QR code if it's easier for you. And then anytime during the event, I would ask you to ask the question. First, put the name of the person you would like to hear the answer from, and then put your question. And as well, you can also rate these questions by putting the thumb or pushing the thumb, and then these questions will become more relevant, and then my colleague Eric will read this question loudly to the person that you named, and you will get the answer, because for us it's very important to do this. And now we are turning to our welcome remarks. And I would like to invite Mr. Raivis Kronbergs, Director of State Chancellery of Latvia. And he is the key person in Latvia that is responsible for the SOE's governance coordination. So thank you for coming, and the stage is yours.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here in Riga, half of you in internet, for the Baltic regional launch of the OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. This is a significant event that marks another step forward in our shared efforts to strengthen the governance of the state-owned enterprise and promote sustainable development across our region. And let me also extend my gratitudes to the event organizers, the OECD, the Baltic Institute of Corporate of Governments, and State Chancellery of Latvia for their dedicated and hard working and bringing this important event to the life. I wish you all inspiring and productive days as we collaborate and to strengthen governments and support the sustainable development of our regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will say also a few words as one of the co-organizers. I will ask the very difficult question: why we are talking specifically about the governance of state-owned enterprises? I think the number of state enterprises is not the largest comparing with others. So why state enterprises? And I started to think, how to illustrate how they are important to us. When we are talking about the largest group of companies in the Baltics, usually they are operating across the 3 countries. The region is small. And we are naming some probably well-known privately owned companies, and so on, but not state-owned companies. But I tried to make an exercise, make some calculations, and I summed up all state-owned enterprises in the Baltics. If we are summing up the private business, one enterprise, the group of companies, we can do this theoretically with the state enterprises. And I created on the paper, of course, on the Excel, the group of companies called Baltic State Enterprises. And what numbers I got, just for illustration, I will say only 3 numbers. The total number of companies, 187. The total revenue of these companies, 13.6 billion euros. The total number of employees of these companies, 85,000 people. Do you know the bigger group of the companies? But it's not all, yes? Because if we will think that in each country we have a municipality-owned companies, then these numbers could even double. And once again, it's not everything. Because state-owned enterprises and municipality-owned enterprises are important for our economies and our citizens and our businesses. Because what they are doing, they're ensuring specific services to be delivered of the reasonable price and the high quality, like electricity, like gas, like water, and so on and so on. So they should be managed and governed perfectly. Otherwise, either we will not get it, the water or the electricity or gas, or we will pay a lot, right? So the public service sector, not only as a service provider, but also an indicator how well does the state understands good governance. Also has a tremendous impact on the overall improvement of business environment and the attractiveness of our economies for the foreign investors. Because quite often I'm asked when I'm traveling all over Europe and so on, they are asking, what is the status in public sector in your country or countries in your region. And this is one of the indicators. That is it kind of corrupted or something like that and so on. And when I say that we are quite developed, they say, oh, great, we have to think about it, about the investments and so on. So this is why it is so important for us to continue to improve the corporate governance of Latvian, Lithuanian, and Estonian state-owned enterprises and municipality-owned enterprises. It's true that Baltic countries have previously achieved a reasonably high level of the corporate governance practices at the state-owned enterprises. It is especially visible when comparing our countries with other countries that were part of Soviet Union back in time. I know quite well because we are quite in good relationship with these countries and the institutions and organizations. And even some, now they called Central and Eastern Europe countries, that were also more advanced. But it doesn't mean that we should sit and relax and enjoy our life, right? Why? It's not about the competition, of course, but it's still more to do, and it has to be done in the world that is changing and becoming even more predictable. Sorry, less predictable. And expectations of our customers are growing. The regulation is increasing. So the supervisory boards, management boards, and all the companies, they really have to, to make like this and to continue to work hard. Yes. So everyone, including the owners, that is the state usually, the board and the management of each company should constantly keep first learning about the best corporate governance practices and working to implement them in practice. So thank you for coming and joining this event, because I believe that every one of you has a lot of thoughts how to improve, but today we will also share a lot of new information to help you to achieve these goals. So thank you once again for coming and being here. Okay, so now we are turning to the introductory presentation, and I would like to invite on the stage Sarah Sultan, head of the State-Owned Enterprise Unit at Capital Markets and Financial Institutions Division at OECD, that it specifically traveled to Riga. And it's first time for you in Riga? Yes, from Paris, where is the headquarters of OECD. So thank you for coming, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Rytis, and very special thanks to the State Chancellery in Latvia for welcoming us into their facility, into their capital. It's a beautiful capital, and I hope today I'll have a bit of time to take a stroll to really soak in the Baltic vibes. I'd also like to thank Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance for co-organizing this together with us and the State Chancellery. A very important event, as Rytis mentioned. We're here to launch the regional launch of the SOE guidelines, and I'm really excited to say that the Lithuanian translation is nearly on the way. The Latvian translation is, I understand, planned and will be on the way. So we hope to be able to also share the local translations of these guidelines with you very soon. So I'm going to give you some facts and figures about the guidelines so you better understand what's changed, because the guidelines have been around for the last 20 years, and they're the globally recognized standard, and we have recently revised them. So they were developed, we're almost going to celebrate the 20 years of the SOE guidelines. They were revised in 2015, and again this year they were revised to take into account some important changes, globally in the corporate governance environment, but also in the role and size of SOEs. Now, who oversees the guidelines? So it's an OECD instrument, and what that means is that the OECD Council adopts them as a legal instrument of the OECD, and they are adhered to naturally by all OECD member countries, but they can be adhered to by any other country. In fact, we have 42 adherents today, and this legal instrument is really recognized today as the global standard. There's no other standard dealing with the corporate governance of SOEs globally. And really, we have countries all around the world who look towards OECD members, especially those who have gone through recent reforms, corporate governance reforms, to better understand how they can utilize this instrument, which is purposely set at a very high level of aspiration, which is also designed in a way to what we call outcomes-based instrument. It means that no country may have the same path, but that the recommendations in the guidelines should lead to desired outcomes. So this is particularly relevant, I think, in the area of state-owned enterprise reform, because no country's path or reason to own SOEs may look the same. Sure, you may have some shared, maybe regional history or regional approaches, but really every country is unique in the way in why it owns SOEs, but also in the way it organizes the ownership and the governance of SOEs. And so they are designed to be flexible, and they're designed to also be proportional. So the idea is that, as you know, many corporate governance codes also take into account the flexibility and proportionality principles. They're aimed to be adapted towards the size of the SOE, their commercial orientation, and so on. And they're purposely set at a very high level of aspiration. And that has been important because they're really seen as a lodestar for reform. We say no one country has fully implemented the SOE guidelines, but we do want to keep the bar high, and we see that has a lot of value when it comes to reforming SOEs. And we've heard all the good arguments shared by the Prime Minister, by the State Chancellor, and by also Ritas on what are the benefits of reform, and indeed managing SOEs responsibly, accountably, with integrity, with good corporate governance is key to economic competitiveness, in today's world, to economic resilience. I think the conversation has changed a lot in the last 20 years about the role of SOEs. I think we can all recognize that. And also towards sustainable development, and we see increasingly the need where there's a role for SOEs to play there. We also monitor the implementation of the guidelines, and we have recently just launched this report that looks at implementation across 59 jurisdictions. So if you want to get a sense of trends, I'll present some of them to you today, but I encourage you to go online, download our report, get a sense of how countries are actually implementing the guidelines in practice. Now, why are the guidelines important in today's context? What we see is that there is a growing role of SOEs in the global marketplace. We heard the figures in the Baltics. My guess is that the share of SOEs in the Baltics has probably gone down in the last 20 years, but globally, the share of SOEs has actually grown in the last 20 years. So we see this, the share of SOEs among the top 500 companies by revenue has quadrupled, which is quite significant. So just to compare and contrast with the Baltic figures and the international figures, we're really talking about the top 500 here. So we're talking about a sliver of SOEs, but the biggest, let's say, most globally significant ones. There are 126 out of the top 500. They employ 21 million people. They own 53.5 trillion US dollars in assets, and they generate 12 trillion US dollars in revenue. And a lot of these SOEs, a great majority of them, are not listed. And this has significance for corporate governance, because we know that listing SOEs can help drive better corporate governance, can help drive better performance. And many of these SOEs, as you can see from the chart on the left, operate in sectors that are quite significant, not only for economic resilience, but also sustainability. And you can see a lot of these sectors are actually greenhouse gas and capital intensive sectors like mining, petroleum refining, oil production, and so on. And these SOEs also drive the share of revenue, so they're actually quite important. So what's happening in global capital markets? We also see that SOEs are also important there. 12% of global capital market capitalization has the public sector as an owner. So what does this represent? It represents 12 trillion US dollars of global market capitalization, where the state is a significant owner. But this looks really different across markets, so I don't have the Baltic specific figures. Maybe some of you do, but I can tell you in Europe, for example, we see an average of 8%. In other jurisdictions, nearly 50%. So, and the OECD average is 2%. So that's why revising the guidelines has come at an important time, because we see these global changes. We see that SOEs are playing a key role, and we need to take that into consideration. And we have had 20 years now of implementing the guidelines, and we are able to take in that shared experience of implementing them across OECD members and other countries that have also maybe not adhered to them, but using them as a reference for reform to revise some key provisions. And I'll walk you through the 4 key priorities you see here listed on the slide. We did this revision process. It took about almost 18 months, involved all OECD member countries, so we have had all the Baltic states very much involved in that process, very much contributing. Also stakeholders in the Baltics, and in fact there are some colleagues here in the room today that participated to the public consultation process as commenting and sharing their views. So we've had quite an inclusive and transparent revision process. And that's what led to their adoption earlier this year, as I mentioned. So 4 key priorities. The first is that we recognize that SOE governance brings unique challenges. Why? It's because the intersection between the public sector and the private sector. So naturally, you have some challenges that you have to work around. And in particular, the corporate governance is really aimed to address principal agent problem, but in corporate governance of SOE, the principal agent problem is perhaps even more complicated because you have the state acting in various capacity as owner, shareholder, then regulator, policymaker. So this can make decision-making challenging, right? And so the guidelines aim to strengthen recommendations that aim to separate these roles to ensure that the state acts as an informed and active owner. Secondly, you saw the figures on the growing share of SOEs. The issue of competition, fair competition, level playing field is becoming increasingly important. So we've looked at those provisions. We've looked also at the importance of setting high disclosure standards for SOEs. I mean, these were already in the guidelines before, but we've certainly strengthened provisions in those areas to ensure SOEs remain transparent and accountable, of course, when you implement the guidelines. And that boards also have the necessary competencies, integrity, and objectivity to carry out their functions. And as I mentioned, given the concentration of SOEs in sectors that are important for the low-carbon transition, we've actually added a whole new chapter dealing with sustainability and responsible business conduct, and I'll go into each of these in detail. First, to address the governance challenges of state ownership, again, as I mentioned, the guidelines really emphasize the state needs to act as a professional owner, an active owner, an informed owner. In practice, what does that mean? It means that the state should have a very clear idea why it owns SOEs in the first place. And, that may change over time. It should have clear expectation for the SOEs. And many SOEs also fulfill important public policy objectives, sometimes public service obligations. So it's important to make all these things very clear for the state to have these ideas clearly, let's say, articulated. And what we see is it's also important to professionalize the way the state acts as an owner. And here we've seen a move towards the establishment of centralized ownership departments or agencies that really bring together important, let's say, civil servants or even mix of private sector experts under one umbrella to look after the SOE portfolio. So in Lithuania, we see there's a coordinated model. I believe in Latvia as well. And in Estonia, we have a department in the Ministry of Finance. So all different countries, again, as I mentioned, do it different ways. We have very different shades of gray. But in all countries, it's important to sort of group these these important roles that the state owner can play under one, let's say, umbrella, and to separate this out from policy making and regulation. And what we see here is a move in over half of jurisdictions that we've surveyed have moved towards more centralization, more coordination, and also have established some sort of document or legal framework or policy that sets out why the state owns SOEs and how it seeks to let's say, govern them. And we see in the Baltic states, actually, in all of these areas, including on reporting, annual reporting on the performance of the SOE portfolio, that all the Baltic states are actually implementing all these good practices. So that's really reassuring. So what have we done to revise the guidelines in this area? Again, further emphasizing the role and functioning of centralized or coordinated ownership entities. What we see in the international landscape is also a rise in state holding companies. So we also had some provisions there. But I think the key message in the guidelines is really, how do you ensure whole of government approach? However you organize it in your respective countries, how do you ensure whole of government approach that ensures consistency and professionalism? We further worked on definitions of ownership and control in the guidelines. So you'll see that the guidelines have an applicability and definitions section, and these provisions now better look at how the state may still exercise control, even if it may not have, let's say, a corresponding amount of voting rights, but that still may exercise decisive influence in the decision-making of the company. And the guidelines would then, of course, apply. And also through corporate groups, right? And how does good governance look like in a corporate group structure where the state may be the parent, the owner of the parent company, but then how does that look like from a governance perspective vis-a-vis subsidiaries? So a few other areas, but in the interest of time, I will move forward on the second topic, which relates to how to ensure a level playing field when SOEs are out there in the market in potential or actual competition with the private sector. And there the guidelines emphasize this importance of separating regulatory and policy-making functions from the exercise of state ownership. That's also where the centralization of the ownership function comes, plays an important role, because it helps you to sort of ring-fence that work from the policy-making or the regulatory work that other ministries or departments or agencies may be tasked with. Providing adequate redress mechanisms for stakeholders and competitors, and ensuring transparency around any public policy objectives and PSOs that SOEs may be assigned. And of course, adherence to general laws, tax codes, and regulations. So we see a mixed bag across countries. I mean, what we see is that in some countries, even though SOEs may be subject to equal regulatory treatment as other firms, some SOEs may be prone to certain advantages, tax advantages, or implicit advantages, like because of state guarantees, being able to borrow at lower interest rate, which may tilt the playing field. And in companies that are fulfilling important public service obligations, well, of course, here in the region and all over Europe, you have state aid rules that apply that govern the importance of, let's say, adequate and fair compensation, but also require accounting separation where SOEs are carrying out public service obligations. So I guess in this part of the world, it's less of a problem, but there's still important need to ensure SOEs are compensated transparently, right? Because then the implicit advantage that can be derived from a compensation that is not adequate, let's say that is maybe overcompensated, versus the disadvantage it may cause for an SOE operating in the marketplace if it's undercompensated. So the guidelines call for provisions that really look at these aspects of compensation. They also discourage the use of SOEs to subsidize or grant advantages to other commercial undertakings, and encourage SOEs to act in accordance with commercial considerations if they're acting in the marketplace. And this is actually something that's come from trade agreements, because increasing number of trade agreements have disciplines on SOEs, and this topic of competitive neutrality is actually growing in relevance and importance even in trade and competition circles around the world. And we have actually had quite a bit of interest in the guidelines from people working on trade and competition. So it's important to be aware of these provisions and how they can reinforce also, let's say, obligations that trading partners have with each other. So on improving corporate governance, so the guidelines, of course, is an instrument dealing with core corporate governance issues just as much as they deal with the other issues. And here, the way the guidelines are designed are really promoting transparency and accountability. And how is this done? Well, one is through boards, ensuring boards are fit for purpose, and the other is ensuring SOEs act or are sort of operating in accordance with high standards of integrity, transparency, disclosure as well. So we've seen a lot of countries, and you'll be surprised, but we've seen a lot of progress in the last 20 years on SOEs being subject to the same or somewhat equal disclosure standards as listed companies. So over half of jurisdictions require this for their SOEs, subjecting SOEs to external independent audit, as opposed to just, for example, state audit procedures. And on the board side, we see that still there's work to be done. For example, on the issue of politicians sitting on boards, a quarter of countries still don't outright ban it. If they don't ban it, doesn't mean that maybe it's happening in practice, but still it's an important safeguard that could be worked into regulation or policy or even legislation in some jurisdictions. Here in the local context, we see that there's a ban actually. And then on board independence, this is also important. Of course, this looks different across corporate governance codes, even in company law across jurisdictions, but we don't see a huge alignment with the updated definition of independence that we've added in the SOE guidelines. Now, new recommendations, what are they addressing? They're addressing the importance of the board's responsibilities with regards to risk management and the oversight of internal, external audit and controls. We have strengthened provisions dealing with board diversity, autonomy, and independence. And as I mentioned, the definition of independence has been strengthened as well. And more clarifications have been provided on the duties and responsibility of boards in particular as well, taking into account stakeholder interests. And last but not least, as I mentioned, we have a new chapter on sustainability. And there, I've given you the facts and figures on sort of the large share of SOEs in high-emitting sectors, but also we have another interesting data point when we've looked at the highest globally emitting companies that are listed. 18% of the shares of these companies have the public sector as an owner. So, you know, the state as an owner or SOEs themselves, who may be investors, are exposed increasingly to climate change related risks through this participation in these high emitting companies. And we see a very small share of countries, only a quarter, integrating climate related expectations into their ownership policies. And finally, when we look at greenhouse gas emissions and disclosure of them, of course, this is one aspect of sustainability. We recognize sustainability encapsulates a broader number of issues, also important social issues as well. More work can be done in terms of raising the bar on the disclosure of emissions, especially scope 3. We have about roughly half of companies that we've looked at that are disclosing scope 1 and 2. And so there we've mirrored also the G20 OECD corporate governance principles that have a whole new chapter dealing on sustainability, because this is equally important for all types of companies, not just SOEs. But the difference here is what we're saying, SOEs can also, or the state can have an expectation that their SOEs can lead by example. So through setting clear expectations, through the ownership policy, through requirements or expectations on sustainability related disclosures. And here in Europe, we have CSRD, in any case that will be coming into effect very soon. So I'm sure it's something that will be important for SOEs and all other companies. For the boards to really be thinking about the opportunities and challenges that come with regards to sustainability. And finally, on responsible business conduct, in recognizing the role that SOEs have, their responsibilities towards their stakeholders and their employees. So this sort of wraps it up, but well, wraps up 2 years of work, I should say, actually involving all of you as stakeholders to that process. And I really look forward to the discussion, because it's one thing to talk about the theory, it's another to talk about in practice. So I look forward to further discussions the rest of this morning.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. I think that we got more than we expected, because we expected to learn about what's new in the revised guidelines, but we got some analysis of our countries, how our countries are standing in one or different kind of areas. That is great. And let's try to see how our Slido tool is working. And I would like to ask my colleague Eric to start with the questions to Sarah.
Yes, with pleasure. Question number 1. As SOE's presence in global business landscape is increasing, what is OECD's standpoint regarding changes in rationales when it is allowed for states to do business?
Thank you for the very good question. The SOE guidelines, and so my position, of course, is based on the consensus of our members, right, is that we don't question why a state should own SOEs or not. But if you do own them, you need to make it clear why you own them. Indeed, we do see a growing share of SOEs in the global marketplace. I mean, this also may be driven by developments in non-OECD economies as well, where we see the state-owned sector playing a more prominent role in these economies, and these large multinationals, which happen to also be state-owned, are more present in the global marketplace. So this is sort of driving the numbers the way you see it. So we don't take a position on that, but what we do say is that if they're there, they're acting in the marketplace, they should act in accordance with commercial considerations. They should also not, let's say, act in a way that can undermine global competition, especially when they integrate into global value chains or even operate in third markets. It's really important to uphold those high standards of conduct also and ensure that when the state is sort of acting as a shareholder of the company, it's acting as a shareholder really what any shareholder would expect, right? A proper return from the company. And those kinds of provisions are integrated in the Chapter 3 of the guidelines, where you can look at, get further detail on what those expectations set out.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more?
Yes, please.
Next question is, what countries would you say set the best standard for implementing the good corporate governance guidelines in practice? And the aim of the question is, who should we learn from?
That's also a very good question. We don't like to pick favorites. And I think in every country, there's something to take away, right, from the reform. And I said that every country has a unique path and the guidelines are outcome-based. So there's no one way of achieving the provisions that are in the guidelines. But I'd say that in Europe, we have many good examples of corporate governance, depending on also the tradition, civil law tradition, common law tradition. All these things will impact the way the laws are developed, the way the corporate governance codes are developed, the way the tradition, corporate governance tradition. So I think in the region, you also have to look towards countries that may have similar systems as yours to be able to find inspiration. In Europe, though, we do have, from the Nordics and the Scandinavians, I think really, let's say, strong tradition of state ownership, but also strong tradition of the professional, the state acting as a professional owner, integrating very high standards, but also we see in, for example, UK, Ireland, some very interesting developments, especially, for example, on sustainability, some very interesting takeaways. But again, it'll look different. Some countries organize their ownership model in the form of a state holding company. So then company law applies to how those holdings are run, and they may have an independent board, may be sheltered more from political influence or undue influence. It's a tricky question, but we have to look at every national context and what are the challenges in every national context, design a framework that works there, because what may work in one jurisdiction may not be easily transposed in another.
Very diplomatic, but Scandinavia was mentioned, yes? Okay, last one. What areas and aspects of revised OECD SOE guidelines are most challenging in practical implementation? What do you think?
Good question. I think, I mean, the next panel we have will be focused on boards. I think on the board issue, this comes up all the time. Professionalizing boards, board composition, board remuneration. How can we hold boards accountable, right? When the state is an owner, you know, how can it make its expectations clear? And sometimes maybe the boards are not doing the job, or maybe the state's not clear about what it wants the boards to achieve. And so these types of conversations between boards, the dialogue between the board and the shareholder, the state as a shareholder, is really important. And I think what makes corporate governance of SOEs more complicated is the intersection between public policy and business. Because the moment you mix those two, you get all sorts of politics mixed in, but also different goals and objectives. So that's why it's important to calibrate, right, expectations. So I was actually really pleased to hear that there's going to be annual expectations letter now in Latvia, as was mentioned by the Prime Minister. I think that's one good way of helping solve that problem, at least getting very clear expectations to the boards on what you expect of the state shareholder. Then board does its job, great. Doesn't, then you have means to deal with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Sarah. And just to add that these expectations of the owner should not change every month.
That's true.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Yeah, I was not making a joke because I know some cases when a letter of expectations is revised several times a year. So then it's not expectations, something different. Okay, so now we continue and we are starting our session 1. The title of the session is Recent SOE Reforms in the Baltic States. So as I said in my opening remarks that we already, in each of our Baltic country, we have already certain achievements. And it will be very interesting to learn not only our own countries, but so-called to benchmark to see what is happening or what happened already in neighboring countries, because it's not always the case that you can learn about this. So let me start from Latvia. So I would like to invite on the stage Raivis Kronsbergs, Director of State Chancellery of Latvia. So.
Thank you. Sarah shared us to 3 Baltic neighbors, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, expectation about corporate governments, enterprises. But if I may, I have a small presentation or status quo about Latvian status quo. And in my presentation will be 3 points: Latvia's ownership portfolio, implementation of OECD guidelines, and future development of corporate governments of SOS. About ownership portfolio, the Republic of Latvia currently owns shares in 78 companies, of which 63 are 100% owned. And since the management model is decentralized, the shareholders of these companies are several ministries, and many of which are also responsible for sectoral policies. And similar to other Baltic countries, the largest and most important state-owned companies are in sectors such as energy, transport, communication, and forestries, and which also provides the largest dividend to the state budget. About implementation, since joining the OECD and implementation in the OECD guidelines, the governance of the state-owned enterprises has been streamlined, starting with the approval of strategic goals by the Cabinet of Ministries. And the state implements the active investor principles. It's mean as setting ambitious financial and non-financial goals, and political influence is minimized. The Cabinet of Ministers is the highest decision-making body regarding the setting of strategic goals, the valuation of participants, and the distribution of dividends. And Latvia has two-tier governments in large SOS, which means that there is a supervisor board and management boards. At the coordination institution, with the case in the State Chancellery also has its own supervisor council, which is made up of representatives of largest shareholders, respectively ministries. 9 years will have passed since 2016, and overall, we can conclude that the OECD guidelines provide a good incentive to provide governance processes in Latvia. During this time, we have also discovered many things that we need to be improved. A few years after the introduction of the OECD guidelines and evaluation of the implemented reforms was launched. This was done with financial support from the European Commission, and we regularly monitoring the development of corporate governance processes in neighboring countries, Lithuania and Estonia, and carried out of information exchange project with the Nordic countries. And in addition to that, the State Chancellery is also actively involved in promoting innovation in state-owned enterprises. One of the significant outcomes from previous projects and evaluates with the introduction of shareholders' inspection letters. Parliament just on this November approved changes to the corporate governance law that will be help categorized companies based on their revenue. It's mean companies grouped or selected as commercial, non-commercial, and state-dependent semi-commercial SOS. And our parliament approved change to the corporate governance law to introduce sustainability reporting by the state-owned enterprises too. It's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raivis. So maybe you can take the seat here on the stage, because anyway, I believe there will be questions. And I would like now to invite on the stage Tarmo Porgant. He is the head of State Ownership and Public Procurement Department at Ministry of Finance in Estonia. So please.
Hello, thank you for inviting us. Short introduction. I'm in the Ministry of Finance already from 2000 and also dealing with the accession of OECD in years 2008 until 2010. So have been dealing with those issues quite a lot of time already. So I give also a short preview how our organization looks like. So we have this dual model, coordinating unities, Ministry of Finance, and we have at the same time 4 SOEs to govern. And currently we assist also the nomination committee. And then line ministries have those other companies. And from organizational point of view, how many people they have concentrating on owners' duties is also shown on this table. And this is maybe one of the challenges also in the future, that we currently have only 26 active SOEs, additionally quasi-companies, foundations, and State Forest Management Center. But in near future, we will have 23 SOEs which are acting, because we are currently in the process where one is in the privatization process and 2 are last week decided to be liquidated, actually. And to have also better understanding of those companies, then as in Latvia, also we have this one big giant Estonian Energy, Eesti Energia, which takes half of the volume. And from this slide, there is also a good picture about the volatility of energy prices and market. So in 2022, we had very good profits in this sector, but this year, unfortunately, I mean 2023, when the prices went down, then the company had a big loss also because of the revaluation of the assets. But coming back to the reforms, then I thought, what is the timeline for recent reforms? When I started already in 2000, then maybe one important point was 2010, when we joined the OECD, and one topic was, let's say, problematic, that was still also after the accession in reviewing process, and this was the transparency of the nomination of supervisory board members. And we had to report until 2018 to get also this topic from the table. And that we got thanks to the nomination committee, which was formed in 2017. And before that, the ministers or ministries nominated all the supervisory board members. After this nomination committee started, the committee will or makes proposals to the ministry based on competences and the, let's say, needs of the companies. And then the minister decides whether he or she accepts those candidates or not. If not, then the committee has to propose new candidates. Yes, this helped us in the OECD to let's say, have no additional topics that need to be evaluated. But as we saw that the governance models and not requirements, but guidelines are evolving during the time. Then the next step was in 2020 when we also made the ownership policy approved by the government. Before that, we had already from 1995 a special law for state participation in enterprises. We have several times amended it. One biggest amendment was in connection with the accession to OECD in 2010, and the latest version is in force from 2022, when we had added also into the law that all the SOEs have to have owners' expectations. Some of those were prepared already in 2014. The first was for the Estonian energy. And yes, from regulation side, those owners' expectations have to be revised every 3 years, not every month. There were some smaller changes additionally. Maybe one topic is the transparency and how the companies have to report their financial results, about their important activities and challenges. We are trying to set the rules as possible similarly to listed companies, but there we make some exceptions for smaller, as you saw from this one previous slide. And we have also very small SOEs with a couple of million turnover annually. Okay, those were the major changes what we have recently, and looking into the future, then one topic that comes every year on the table is the state objectives, whether they are clearly defined in the owner's expectations, whether they are in line with each other, or there are also objectives that are with conflicting interests in one company to offer some public services and earn profits and pay dividends, and those questions might always be in line with each other. And also, the nomination committee makes annually the self-evaluation of supervisory board members, and this question, the clearness of objectives, is one of the questions that has got the lowest points in those reviews. Okay, and the ongoing challenge that has been so far and will be also in the future is the availability of competent supervisory board members. As a small country, we have one topic that if you have a very specific company in some kind of concrete area, then you don't have too many possibilities to include competent people, because mostly they have their own enterprises, and so they might have conflict of interest also with their own companies, and the law doesn't allow such situations. So yes, the nomination committee struggles with finding competent people, and then the next question is whether they are willing to participate in those companies as a supervisory board member, because you have some regulational obstacles, or with then you will be a politically exposed person. You have to report to the banks more. This makes their life a little bit harder, and then everyday business harder. And sometimes it's also the question about remuneration, whether the salary that is offered for the supervisory board members is sufficient to compensate their time and effort. And yeah, maybe the last challenge in the future that we have had on the table every year, actually, the question whether we still need those companies as a state-owned or not. The couple of last coalitions have had also this approach that we have to review the situation, and if possible, and the state interests are not so important anymore in some companies, then we should privatize partly or fully. And this is an ongoing process. As I said, one process is currently ongoing. I hope it will end in this year. And we have a couple of analyses ongoing or tasks from the government to present analysis next year to whether we will go on with additional privatizations or not. Okay, that was my short presentation. And I have those many slides here. We can distribute those later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarmo. Thank you, Tarmo. So now we are moving to Lithuania. And just for you to know, maybe probably most of you know, heard on the news that 2 weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, we had a new parliament election. So now it's a very hot time in Lithuania forming a new government. So, of course, our next speaker is not responsible for forming new government, but nevertheless. So I would like to introduce that online, Vaidotas Rudokas. He is the director of the Enterprise Policy Department and the Ministry of Innovation, Economy and Innovation of Lithuania. So thank you, Vaidotas, for joining us online. Greetings from rainy Riga. So the stage is yours. Yeah. And don't forget the Slido. Yes, please.
Thank you, Rytis, for the greetings and also greetings for all the audience and to you from sunny Vilnius today. As you see in my background, sorry for me not having a presentation like my colleagues, but I will try to make it briefly, like to leave more time for questions maybe. And for me, it's a great honor to address you today and speak about Lithuania's ongoing journey in SOE's reform. Since 2010, we worked under the pressure to transform SOEs into a transparent, efficient, and of course, value-driven entities. This progress was spearheaded by the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, which has played a central role in shaping governance policies, drafting legislation, overseeing reforms, and of course submitting proposals to the government. As it was mentioned today, we have also the Governance Coordination Center. It is an analytical and good governance principles implementation center, so they are responsible for overseeing how all those policies are implemented into practice. So our reform, maybe I will make a quick journey, retrospective journey to our reform main points, started in 2010 following the publication of Lithuania's first annual review of state-owned commercial property, which analyzed the SOE performance based on, of course, 2009 data. This report revealed significant shortcomings in SOE's governance and what were the main findings. So first of all, the lack of clear objectives. SOEs operated in those times without strategic direction and coherent goals. There were information gaps. Data on SOE activities and governance were neither systematically collected nor disclosed, and that leads to poor performance. Operational results were frequently fell short of potential and not ambitious. So the main reason for those, I think, was also insufficient management of the SOEs. So what key achievements we made to solve those measures in the process we call SOE reform? First of all, we implemented and not implemented but regulated by legal acts, because we are a legal country, all the main guidelines into government resolutions and laws and other legal acts. So in line with OECD recommendations and international good practices, in 2010, the government passed the transparency guidelines, which set the high transparency and accountability requirements for all SOEs. That was the first step in our journey. So after that, in 2 years period in 2012, ownership guidelines were approved. The ownership guidelines outlined the government's ownership policy for, of course, for all SOEs, and provide decisions on the principles to be followed in defining strategic objectives and setting financial indicators, separated regulatory and ownership functions, formed boards and supervisory boards of SOEs. In 2015, we created nomination guidelines. Those guidelines formalized the transparency process for selecting boards members. So also they determined the composition of the collegial bodies of the SOEs and put into force requirements for candidates and so on. So for the last issue, we create, I mentioned before, there was a lack of clear objectives in SOEs management. So we created letters of expectations prepared by the shareholders. Those letters are like the main state objectives of the state are put in those letters. The essential recommendations on how to create those letters of expectations are set in the expectations guidelines. So they are also adopted by the regulation of the ministry. So the shareholders, basically they are the ministries, could incorporate into their creation of the letters by those guidelines. So what are the results of that mentioned regulation and our legal acts? So first of all, we strengthened the board's independence. Independent board members numbers from 2012, there was like 6% board members on the boards were independent, and now in 2024 we have 65% of board members as independent members. Of course, each SOE which is responsible to form a board should have at least half of board members in the board as independent board members. Also, all the board chairmen are independent in our SOE's portfolio. We have no politicians and political trust persons on the board. Independent selection agencies also now handle headhunting process, and they are searching for candidates and submitting them to the election commission, which examines the candidates and proposes two or one best candidate for the shareholder to elect to the board. What else? Also, civil servants are now, as well as independent board members and other board members, are now paid for their duties in the boards. So that's a major change for their interest to participate at all in the boards, not only getting the duties and responsibilities, but also to get something in response. It's their salary. And the civil servants are also possible to participate in their separate process of election. So they are coming to the boards, they are elected to the boards as well as independent board members by separate separate nomination guidelines. So yeah, I mentioned about, I guess, letters of expectations. And as my other colleagues from Estonia and Latvia delegation mentioned their portfolio numbers. So in 2015, we had at least 130 SOEs. And nowadays, we have 33 SOEs. And we made a lot of privatizations, restructuring, mergers, and in order to reduce those numbers. And at the last meeting at the OECD's, I was asked, I can't remember from which delegation, how many SOEs do we have now? So we answered that 33. And they told that it's a major improvement and a major achievement by reducing those numbers. So the main reason we reduced those numbers was in 2018 when we decided to apply to the OECD and to enter the organization. We merged 42 forest enterprises into one forest enterprise, so that was a major change to reduce the numbers of our SOEs portfolio. We still have in Lithuania specific state enterprise legal form. It's not a company; it's state enterprise. So, talking about upcoming plans on our reform, one of our goals is to get rid of that obsolete legal form, because the duties responsibilities and duties between the board and the shareholder, also the CEO or that entity, is not very in line with the OECD best practices. So we still have at least 5 state enterprises. We reduced in past few years from state having 17 state enterprises. Now we have 5 state enterprises, but basically all the legal drafts are submitted to the parliament. As Rytis mentioned that we had election, we have government changes, but I think in the upcoming season in spring, they will put their attention to the changes to make it happen and to get rid of that state enterprise legal form. And of course, another goal is to clarify our portfolio and to decide which direction should Lithuania go, talking about Lithuanian centralization of Lithuanian state-owned enterprise portfolio. So that will be on the desk for upcoming government to decide which direction we are going. Now we have 9 basic shareholders of our portfolio. Maybe we'll have less than 3, or at least 3, or maybe 1. Who else knows? So that will be a discussion in Lithuania for upcoming periods. So yeah, I guess that would be the key points for my topic.
Thank you, Vaidotas. So as I said, that we will be using the opportunity to ask questions. So our chief questioning officer, Eric, is ready with the questions. So
CQO, yes. First question, I think, is for all of you. A short comment, please. From the shareholder, means your perspective, how valuable are strong independent boards at SOEs?
Oh, now, yeah, it's working. Then the question is how to evaluate what is the measure of the value. But I would say that strong, competent supervisory boards are the key element for the successful operation of the SOEs.
And our colleagues? What did you say?
I agree with my colleagues from Estonia because all SOSC we're going to closer all neighbors, but supervisors and manager boards need to inside put it.
Why that is?
In my opinion, it's a very good question, and it has like two main keywords in the question itself. First of all, strong and independent. The board is strong, then it's independent. So if the board is really independent, then it's very valuable for the shareholder and for the state. But first of all, it should, how to say, justify its independence, and in some cases, then politicians make some pressure for the company or for the board. They should stand their ground. So then it's a time to show their value, their efforts, and their strong will to show their status. That's maybe my opinion.
Ačiū. A question for representative of Estonia. What is the main reason to choose foundation as a legal form? Is the foundation in Estonian governance similarly as corporation?
Yes, this is one, let's say, Estonian speciality that we have chosen to have those, let's say, quasi-corporations and foundations in those more socially oriented fields of activities like museums, theaters, hospitals, where the market or clients' capability to cover those services with, let's say, common fees is not sufficient.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Kronbergs. Is a centralized model of SOE's governance on agenda in Latvia? As we know, there are centralization elements in more than half of OECD countries.
We have a centralized moments, I told in my presentation, and State Chancellery is supervising about this centralization.
Thank you. And for our Lithuanian speaker, what are the SOEs you want to centralize? Who will be the centralized shareholder of SOEs?
It's a good question. Again, we still not clarified which body will be responsible for centralized model, which maybe it would be the ministry, maybe it would be the governance coordination center, but we're still having process of election ending. So then we will have new government. We will make clear those decisions, and a question also maybe was what companies would be centralized, yes? So some companies could not be centralized because of the third energy package. They should be under the different shareholders. So the theoretical or hypothetical centralized model with only one shareholder is not actually possible by the regulation of the EU. So at least it should be 2 or 3 shareholders with one dominating in this case.
Thank you. Do we have more time for this? Yes. Okay. To Tarmo. Estonian government recently decided to divest several SOEs as there is no need for state to be an owner. Can you explain us how you managed the process?
It's a tricky question in the sense that we have different ways to privatize companies. So we have had cases where we made an IPO of the companies, and there you can also have different ways to sell shares that the state owns, or you raise new capital for the company. You can sell 100% to best buyer on a public, let's say, tender. Or we have also used methods where the company sells their assets and, let's say, activities, and then the legal entity will be liquidated. So we have quite a lot of possibilities to deal with those issues.
Thank you. And now a big question to all of you. This is about our beloved Rail Baltica. Can panelists give few quick fixes in governance of Rail Baltica? Who was that?
We need a lot of money, all Baltic countries.
Yes, about the governance, then I would say that the Estonian part of the, let's say, 3 pillars of the has improved their activities recently a lot to make those investments and building process faster, and also to have better prices on the building investments. But when we are talking about the, let's say, consolidated governance, then we have to just discuss the topics and give our best practices to each other.
Thank you. And the Lithuanian standpoint?
I think the colleague already mentioned we need a lot of money to make it happen, but from the perspective of Lithuania and for the past actions, I think the governance of the company, which is responsible for implementing such a strategic importance project for the country, should be as transparent as possible, and their management also should be accountant and transparent as possible for the society and for the government also. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you, audience, for your questions, and thank you, speakers, for your answers. So now we are turning to the coffee break and networking, and we will come back 3 o'clock sharp. Thank you. Thank you. So we will continue. And before we will continue, I would like to thank you for using the Slido. I think this is a very efficient tool to get from you the most relevant questions and then to get the answers from our speakers. So now we are starting the session number 2, and that will be a panel discussion, the role of SOE boards in sound corporate governance. Actually, we already were emphasizing with our speakers just before the break that the revised OECD guidelines recommend state-owned enterprises to have strong boards that can act in the interest of the enterprise and its owners and the whole society, effectively monitor management and protect management from interference of the political and other interest groups, I would say. So to moderate this session, I would like to ask to come on the stage my colleague Andris Grafs, Vice President Latvia at the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Rytis. Good afternoon. So indeed, we'll discuss now regarding the role of the boards. And as it was mentioned, that board has a certain role in oversight of the company development and also to be a buffer when different interests are attacking the governance and actually operations of state-owned companies. And what we will do today, we'll have two presentations and setting the scene, because it's very important on the one hand to realize and to understand what are emphasis in the revised OECD SOE governance guidelines, what are expectations from a board regarding board composition, also regarding the board size, the duties, and it's explicitly written that board needs to take decision in the best interest of the company. But we have a lot of stakeholders. We have politicians, we have policy objectives, how to balance all those interests also there. And then more and more, what we can see is that there are also non-state shareholders in our state-owned companies. And we'll have also the setting the scene presentation regarding the expectations from a non-state shareholder when there are investments in companies where the state has majority of the shares, and how to balance and the needs and how to proceed to the great results that we all our economies are expecting. So then we start with the first presentation. And it's a pleasure to introduce Kimmo Vertola, who is working at our OECD, Senior Policy Advisor at SOE Unit, under the Capital Markets and Financial Institution Division, just to focus on the expectations from the boards and when actually revised SOE guidelines are saying all about that. So Kimmo, the floor is yours, and Mike is also here.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yes, it's on. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. And I'm happy to be here to tell you a bit about good practices for strong boards of the SOE guidelines. And the strong boards selected OECD as SOE guidelines recommendations. I'm really focusing on two areas. The one is state's role as an owner, and a couple of recommendations on that front. And then on the point 6, the composition and responsibilities of SOE boards. And on these two items, I have concentrated on 3 sub-items. And then there is the merit-based and transparent board nomination, remuneration, and finally the appointing the board members with applicable qualifications as well. And first, I would like to take you to the recommendation where we should look the establishing and safeguarding well-structured, merit-based and transparent board nomination process. And here I would like to especially highlight that the structured nomination and appointment process is highly recommended. Usually it is facilitated by the ownership entity, and this process is based on board profiles, which are also usually defined together with the board or solely at the ownership entity. Then secondly, the selection of the board members. There I would like to highlight the fact that proper evaluation is proposed and suggested. And then the merit-based nomination. So all the board members should have merit-based nomination and appraisal made. And this, of course, is that the use of professional staffing agencies helps in the evaluation of the merit-based nominations. And these staffing agencies, which usually the government or the SOE unit or the ownership steering are employing, should be then sort of having a competition every 2 or 3 or 4 years in order to have the latest and the most proficient service provider for you. Then if one moves on to the composition and responsibilities of the SOE boards, then the boards should be selected on core competencies and possessive knowledge. And there the merit-based is the key. Of course, it needs that the board members need to have personal integrity and professional qualifications as well. And then the knowledge and acquired experience is key, especially if the acquired experience is in the line of the business of the company as well. Then one looks to diversity in the companies. So the diversity is more than just the gender, it's age, it's geographical background, it's professional background, and educational background as well. And there the board members may need to acquire additional skills, and therefore it's important the board is able to educate itself as well. So there is a board process that they would able to increase their knowledge as well. And if you would have a board member who has combination of more than one sectoral experience, of course that would be great, so that he or she has wider experience in the board to be served. Then one comes to the remuneration policy, and the recommendation is that it's clear and transparent and overreaching, the recommendation policy. And it is key to notice that the recommendation for the objectives operating in a competitive environment is affecting the remuneration levels as well. So the remuneration levels should align to long-term interests of the SOEs and reflect market conditions. So if the company is on a very strong growth mode and the company is growing and the size of the company is increasing, hopefully this is then taking into consideration the market consideration and the board remuneration is moving accordingly. Also vice versa, if the company's businesses are sold, the company is decreasing in size, the importance of the company's operation is less than previously, also the board fees can be flexible to downwards as well. So it's important to look the whole situation. And of course the good practices calls for performance-based remuneration for components for the management, but not as much to the board. So it is important to notice that the management has the performance-related sort of instruments and performance-related pay and performance-related KPIs in their remuneration, but boards mainly are on fixed basis because if the boards would have the same flexible and performance-based remuneration, then there would be a conflict of interest. If the board is setting the targets which are the same for the management and for themselves, then the remuneration is most likely to have a conflict of interest. So this is briefly summarizing the OECD recommendations on the board selection and the board remuneration as well. Now I briefly move on to Finland as being previously in the ownership steering department in Finland, and I just highlight you some case examples of the board selection and remuneration in Finland. And this is setting the scene. So this is the structure, how the ownership steering is structured in Finland. We have ownership steering department in Prime Minister's office. Half of the 70 companies is in there, and the other half is in line ministries. The ownership steering is setting the coordinating role, and it also is setting the general principles of hiring board members, and a lot of the principles are also derived from the ownership steering policy paper. Then the Solidium, which is state holding company for minority listed holdings, they do have their own process selecting board members to these listed companies. In Finland, all the listed companies have nomination committees, and in these nomination committees are represented the 3 largest shareholders. And because Solidium has minority shareholder, which is significant, they have their representatives in the nomination committees. And in Prime Minister's office, we have 4 listed companies, and the state holding is significant. So therefore, civil servants are representing the state in the nomination committee as well. And in other companies where we do have other shareholders, we do have nomination committees also. So the principles are there that first of all, the ownership strategy and the company strategy are in line, and therefore this is giving the basis of selecting the board members. And the board members are selected on the basis very much in line with the OECD recommendations. So there is experience, expertise, strategic situation requirements, and corporate to provide diverse expertise as well. So the board is supposed to be very diverse and bringing different competencies for the selection process and also when working together. And our aim is to have a sufficient gender balance, so minimum 40%. We also look at the situation that if the board needs to be redefined due to the change of the company strategy, the board tenure, which is recommended to be 5 to 7 years, can be shorter. So if we need to change board members because the strategy has changed, the board tenure can be 3 years. So it is flexible. It's not fixed 5 to 7 years process. And when one looks the cycle how the board nominations are done in Finland, we start the review of board composition in May, June. Then we move in August, September doing the profiles and assessment in October, November. November, December, we do the candidate interviews, 2 or 3 candidates interviewed. January, February, we provide the minister with our selected candidate to be nominated to the board, and then the nominations will take in April, May, or in the shareholders meeting. Then one comes to the board remuneration in Finland, so it's important that it's transparent. All this information is publicly available in the annual reports of the companies, and then the compensation for board service is taking into consideration the market situation and requirements imposed by the global aspects of the board members. And this is important if one wants to attract international board members, because the remuneration levels are higher in order to get international board members. And also we have noticed that in some of the state-owned enterprises, the remuneration has not moved a bit or euro or cent in like 10 years or so. So therefore we need to have in place a long-term plan how to increase gradually the remuneration of the board members in the competitive levels as well. One exception here is that in the listed company, the state has the policy that where the state has direct holding, the 40% of the fixed fee is paid in shares and 60% is paid in cash. And basically that 60% is then for taxes. So eventually if you are a board member in a listed company, you get the shares and you are expected to hold them as well as long as you are the board member as well, because you every year get more and more shares. So this is just to make sure that your interest is aligned with the shareholders and you have the common goal to increase the shareholder value. Then just one case example of the state railways, how the board remuneration is there. So it is the fixed annual fee paid in monthly installments, and then there is a 600 euros committee or board meeting fee in addition to that. So this is the sort of level, and we don't want to see in Finland any case where the board fee would depend on the CEO's salary or any other management salaries, because this is potentially creating a cycle where the board is increasing the CEO's salary, which actually is relating to the fact that you are increasing the board fees as well. So therefore we always say it's fixed and it should be market-based rather than dependent on any other issues. So I would like to finish here. And then just briefly show you that this is a competence mapping tool, what can be used, and this is just to sort of individually aligned or planned or how you want to play it in your countries or in your companies. And a lot of the consultants use the similar type of tools in order to make the assessment of the board competencies and how the board would work as a whole. So I pause here and wish you a very good panel discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kimmo. And actually, what I was thinking is that be careful what you wish for. Because there was one question regarding, so what country examples we need to learn regarding corporate governance, and you shared also the Finnish storing experience. And as far as I know, also currently the State Chancellery project are learning from Finnish experience and how to improve legislation and practices here. And one point what I particularly want to take from your presentation is that if more and more there will be non-state shareholders or companies will be listed, you will have to adjust governance framework to respect all shareholders and adjust the regulation that state cannot decide 100% everything, but you need to have adjusted format. So thank you very much for the insights regarding the boards and also diving into Finnish experience. And let's now proceed with Jean-Pierre Signa, who is head of finance law unit at EBRD. And again, what is very important and where the Baltic countries are moving forward, when more and more companies could be listed, when some shareholders are investing money and expecting good corporate governance. And EBRD has actually quite big expertise and experience in various jurisdictions, also in Baltics. So it's a pleasure to have you here. And the floor is yours regarding non-state shareholder expectations. Please, John.
Good afternoon, and indeed it's a great pleasure to be here. Just as a matter of introduction, so I'm working in the legal department of the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, mostly working on corporate governance, even if my title is financial law, and recently very much on state-owned enterprises. I also joined, together with Sarah, the work at the OECD, so I'm observer at the Working Party for State Privatization and Practices, and I really convinced that the guidelines are a very important tool to shape the direction, but also a very important tool for institutions as ours, because often we find ourselves in negotiating deals with other IFIs, and also for us, for international financial institutions, it's important to have a joint point on the map. And really the guidelines for us ensure what we consider really good practices. So, European Bank for Reconstruction, we are a bank. Of course, what we do investment. Just to give you some figures, we did 112 projects in Latvia for a cumulative investment 1.1 billion. Current portfolio is roughly 406 million. Similar figure for Estonia and slightly higher for Lithuania, where we have 131 projects and 1.6 billion in terms of cumulative investments. We love to see opportunities, and definitely SOEs offer great opportunities for investment, provided that, of course, The aim of the management, the aim of the state is aligned with the aim of my institution. And the current strategy for us essentially is shaped on three main directions: green transition, inclusive transition, and digital transition. So if companies share this interest, we are happy to consider the investment. The new guidelines of corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. What is different? What has changed? We just heard that, it's of course nomination, remuneration. I like to focus, maybe I will also take stock of what has been said before, but I would like to focus on chapter 7, on the new chapter, SOEs and sustainability, just to elaborate on my thinking about that. But before getting there, let's have maybe a small historical excursus. So how it come that we arrived here? If we look at the OECD principle, so the G20 OECD principle of corporate governance, one of the 12 standards for sound financial system, so globally recognized, they were issued in 99. Why? Because there was a crisis. In 98, there was the Asian crisis, very much focused on corporate governance, and therefore the need to have strong standards for ensuring stability and soundness on financial system. They were revised in 2005. Why? Well, again, another crisis, another corporate governance crisis. I'm Italian, so we had Parmalat, very big fraud, but also we had Enron. So there was a need to revise the principles, so to ensure, a better adherence with the practices in place. 2015, again another crisis, financial crisis. In 2015, we all thought it was not a corporate governance crisis, but then we realized that corporate governance was really part of it. And then we finally arrived to 2023, 2024, and where is the crisis? There is no corporate governance crisis. Actually, we faced a crisis. We faced a big crisis with COVID. We faced a social crisis. And hence, I'm starting thinking, so does it mean that sustainability fit with governance, so that there is a link between governance and sustainability? Why sustainability has been put into the scene for corporate governance? But actually, this is not a novelty. Sustainability was always there. And the concept before sustainability, ESG, was essentially this concept in which three dimensions, often tangential from the business table, are really somehow tackled together. And why environmental and social and governance are together? We might have forgotten a bit of that, but I think that a reflection will help. And the way I see it, especially nowadays, is that if we really care about environmental and social, we will not be able to achieve it if we don't put a little bit of governance behind. For instance, we want to improve gender diversity in staff. What do? We need a policy. We need a function that is accountable for the policy. We need a reporting line. We need some sort of disclosure. This is governance. This is just governance. Governance for the target of gender. And the same applies to climate or to environment. How can you discuss climate risks if you don't have a risk department, if you don't have a risk book? So you need some bit of governance as a building block for the other components, so that governance becomes the enabler. It can also be the bottleneck, and often it is, but what we aim is that it becomes the enabler of change. Board. So what does it mean for the board, this new sustainability chapter? Well, I would concentrate on two things that I think that are, at least to me, the main one. The first is the ordinary historical approach to risk has changed. Historically, we have been measuring risk. By the way, I admire the Baltic situation because in my region, in the EBRD region, SOEs are not developed and dynamics are not developed as in Baltics. I'm not saying that here things are perfect. There is always space for improvement, but definitely we look at the Baltics like an example. Yeah. I will, again, as I said, I will not say that you're all doing perfectly, and we are all human, so we all make mistakes. But therefore, you know, often Baltics are a source of inspiration. So then this is important. So I was saying about risk. So historically, risk has been tackled, has been assessed in order to mitigate this. So essentially, if we go to the work of the board, I think that the key role of the board is about the strategic direction. What is strategic direction? It around the three main documents, three main issues. Strategy, so the business vision, budget, the financial means to implement the strategy, and risk, because risk might occur, and therefore you need to have some source, some financing, some action to do in order to mitigate the risk, because you don't want the challenges impede you to achieve the strategy. Is the situation the same now? I would say that the crisis and the whole concept has asked us to do much more, to do something more. Instead of just limiting ourselves to mitigate risk, I think that the new exercise is how can we turn challenges into opportunities. And this, I guess, is the very big change that is required by the board. Of course, boards, they don't live in insulation. Boards, they don't live in a vacuum. They live between shareholders and management, as difficult as boards, often more difficult than boards. But here, and this is my second point, within this, I would say, very rigid structure, accountability structure, where management report to the board report to the shareholder, we need to take in consideration of another party, which are the stakeholders. As important as the shareholders. Because we have seen that, for instance, when customer boycott a product, then the company is in trouble. And how to do that? I think that everything starts with mapping, with the mapping of your stakeholders. I asked my team 2 weeks ago to do this exercise. So pick up your 60 most important stakeholders. And then you will see that not always there is a match. And I think it's important to align the vision of management, the vision of board, and the vision of shareholders. We said before, we heard before about the letter of expectation on who are our stakeholders. Once the stakeholders are identified, then let's do this materiality assessment, this double materiality assessment. Let's try to reflect on how the challenges that are coming out, and we are living in a world where every day there is a new challenge, how the challenge can be transformed in something, an opportunity. I make an example, and then I think my time is almost up. I make an example. I was working with an SOE, let's say in the Balkans, hydropower, hydropower generator, no risk department, so the risks were actually not seen or considered. And of course, being a hydropower generator, very much depending on water, on rain. And unless you know how to do the rain dance, there's very little you can do in order to control your business. We assisted the company with an investment, but we also assisted the company with the strategy. And two ideas came out in terms of strategy. One is, how about floating solar panels that we can put on the dam? Actually, solar panels, floating solar panels are much more effective because the water provides the cold, the temperature that allows panels to work better. And second, pumps to recycle the water at the bottom of the dam to bring it up, to be used when the energy is a low price or when there is a surplus, so that you actually recycle the product. I'm not reinventing the wheel. I don't have the crystal ball. They are doing this already. The point is that the board never asked the question, and management was never challenged on how to do these things. And I think this is possibly my main message. Boards, so what has changed in board needs to ask the question, needs to put the brain under a different point of view. Risks are not there just to be mitigated, but to be transformed in opportunities. And there is a way to do that. This is our expectation as investor when we go to the company, when we want to discuss. And this is really, I think, what are the main lessons that come out from the OECD principle. Let me conclude, if I may, with two quick remarks based on what has been said so far. I'm starting with the nomination. Yes, I agree 100%. I'm using this matrix. We all want to have a well-functioning, diverse, and qualified board. It's difficult, though, when the board is made by two persons. I think you know who I'm referring to. Second one, independent. What is an independent director? And I agree that the definition of independence has been strengthened. But throughout the world, you see that independence is defined by negative terms, non-affiliation terms. Non-affiliation is not independence. There are two different concepts. Non-affiliation means lack of ties with management of the company. But I can be, my grandmother is the best independent person. No, she will not be able to express the independence because she does not have the qualification to do that. So this is where you need to focus for independence. Is the person up to the job? Is the person able to challenge? Is the mindset of the person able to convince manager, to face management, and to propose what an independent mind can do? Of course, there are hard competencies, soft competencies. Usually, many companies, independent board members are just a minority, and you don't want that independent is kept in a corner. So, along with the various expertise you mentioned, you need to have a negotiating skill, diplomatic skill, a lot of activities done by explaining and talking. Final comments. Really my final, I promised. There was a very interesting presentation about the situation in the Baltics. Especially, I'm talking about IPOs. At the EBRD, I worked on Porto Tallinn in Estonia, Enefit Green, still in Estonia, and I worked on Ignitis in Lithuania. Ignitis has been the largest IPOs in the Baltics, and they're still a success. We really hope to see soon some IPOs also in Latvia. Thank you.
Yes, Jean, thank you very much. And actually, you were a good starting points, continues what Kimmo started for our panel discussion. And it's a good question how the two board members can fulfill all the responsibilities that actually are growing globally, right? And also regarding IPOs. So yes. So we are expecting and waiting that more and more companies, and also from Latvia, will be in the list where investors will be able to put the funds and see development. But one phrase which I also put in my notes, that governance and also boards should be enablers, not bottlenecks. And so we'll discuss how it is in Baltic countries regarding the boards. And we'll have 4 independent board members. And not just independent by criteria, but also from the mindset point of view. So what I expect in this panel discussions is there will be honest opinions regarding what really independent board members think about the current situation in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and where we are heading. So let me invite Elina Salava, who is supervisory board member at Riga International Airport. Please welcome here. Erkki Raasuke, supervisory board member at Enefit Green, the company that was mentioned already. Jurate Stanishow Skiene, chair of Lithuanian Post, and also air navigation company. Jurete, welcome on stage, and Klaus Vasks, who is holding 2 chair positions currently, they're Baltic and also TET. And previous speakers set a scene. I will do the same by that. Okay, thank you for joining today. And actually, what I wanted to kick off our discussion with the term strong board. It was mentioned several times by OECD. We can read it in guidelines, revised guidelines. But when it comes to your experience, what would be the main aspects what you would put in this term strong boards? We need development, we need proper oversight, we need to ensure also that the boards are kind of buffer when politicians are changing and trying to influence also decisions that are not on a board desk, but some operational. So challenges are all over the floor. If you would need to put some main perspectives on that 2 words, what it would mean to you. Elina, do you want to start?
Thanks. So first of all, I think that the key focus is challenger. So strong board should be the challenger for the management board, and the challenger in a very positive and professional way. This is not about criticism, but this is about the challenging the management board. So, and another key word is independent professional. For sure, there should come aspects like climate resilient, in a metaphor, so that whatever happens in the environment outside, you should not stress on this. But yeah, challenger and professional challenger is a key aspect in my mindset and from my experience.
Okay, you want to put your experience on those that are mentioned already?
Yes, and probably I would like to emphasize importance of independence, independence of thinking, independence of opinion, providing really critical thinking and opinion that would be really contributing towards the enterprise future and sustainability. And at the same time, finding the balance and dialogue with the shareholder. I think it's important that strong board would also have that balancing perspective. So this is not easy and always tricky, and it depends, on the political cycles. But I think you mentioned very good word buffering. So being independent and providing kind of shield or buffer between sometimes some political, let's say, agendas and still provide enterprise value. So I would add this one, and also adding on professional part. Indeed, it's not enough just to complete some courses of BICGs. It's amazing, but generally having some wisdom again to make decisions. So right competences, right structure of the board, and wisdom and critical thinking. So there are many, many things, and I believe colleagues will add much more.
Okay. So now we have a definition regarding strong boards, and I want to ask the next question to Erkki and Klaus regarding this mix of competence and skills. So you need to incorporate all those in a boardroom just to ensure that really the strong board performs as a strong board. So what do you think, how to structure such a boards, where to find or how to define those competences, because it's shareholder competence, right, to define the profiles, to search for board members, and then suddenly you are meeting your new friends in a first board meeting. Hello, we will work together for next 4 years. So how you are, what's your experience regarding this mix of competence, coming back to the definition what we have, what is actually the strong board? Erkki, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Not to be too abstract about it, is that board is also the team, but as you rightfully walked us in, not a atypical team, because board inside also needs to challenge itself. But still, I would say is that the kind of same 4 components, whenever you hire, I think to keep in mind also relevant to the board. So it's not only the professionalism, of course, I mean, there are more, but also then the character of these people. So I would say is starting off that smart, honest, hardworking, and able to work in a team. So on top of all of the kind of, otherwise competencies is that, I mean, all this mixture to start to work is that, so I'm very much on the kind of personal trait sides now here. Is that I think that also needs to be there, because this group needs to work together.
And if this is not the case?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say that then you keep looking, but I increasingly think, and maybe because I hold the hammer and then I see the nails, but I increasingly think is that we maybe slightly undermine the role of the chairman in the picture. When we look also into the principles, we don't say a single word about the chairman. And maybe there is a reason for that. But I mean, it is with every team is that who is, I mean, you can have the best players around there, is that, but who's going to be the coach, who's going to be facilitate. And that does not mean is that a big father figure, there, but it's a real skill is that I think you can have the best board members in the world, but still basically failing to work together unless they are also well orchestrated. So I have encountered now, particularly recently, that it makes a huge difference how the board is led. Yes, and that's a slightly different thing, I think, than to lead any other team because of the personalities what you have there.
Okay. So Klaus, 2 boards where you are a chair, facilitator, something more, right? Regarding mix of competence, coming back to the strong board definition, your points?
I mean, the strong boards probably starts from the nomination, especially in state-owned companies. And of course, in Latvia, we have this system that the nomination is usually divided between different ministries. And of course, the experience and the knowledge, I mean, of selecting is probably unique at the ministry. Of course, we create this kind of nomination committees with usually maybe some independent member participating, also from BCAG. But I would say that, I mean, we maybe pay not enough attention, I mean, how this group are created, and I mean, because going through the checklist of all the kind of criteria of education, experience, and so on, I mean, that's, I mean, I assume pretty common, but I mean, when these people sit together and are evaluating the applicants and the possible team, I mean, there need to be kind of very experienced stakeholders at the table, so who can really kind of choose the right people and the right team in the first hand. Of course, usually it happens that, I mean, the board is dissolved, like all the board is dissolved, and there is no this like experience sharing from when you joined the board with some previous board members, and that's of course is a plus from one side. I mean, you can create and start everything as a kind of from the blank page, but I mean, that also sometimes kind of limits maybe some unique knowledge which follows when you come to that organization. But I fully agree that the role of the chairman is very important, facilitating and understanding the business itself and the people, because I mean, dealing in state-owned companies, this is a little bit of specific because of the stakeholder management.
Okay. Stakeholders. There is an elephant in the room, at least in Latvia currently, in political discussions. So if improving governance, what we heard also in country experiences. So every year there are some improvements, and if you are looking back 10 years, so it's significant improvement in governance in all Baltic countries. Do you agree? Yes. So those who are online, yeah. So the audience agreed, almost 100%. And there are some waves. When all political agendas there are discussions, how to improve and what to do, and currently, at least in Latvia, and this is not the case in Lithuania and Estonia, is regarding the size of the boards. And it's a movement that we need to cut a board member size. So what to do, not to do with that? So what we did at BSAG, so we took 5 largest state-owned companies and 5 largest municipality-owned companies in Baltics. And what we saw is that actually the minimum number of board members, that is 3, we can see a lot in Latvian state-owned companies, less in Lithuania and in Estonia. In average, it's around 4.5 in Latvia and Lithuania. In Estonia, it's more. So, Jan mentioned that in 2 board members you cannot put all the competences needed. What about the teamwork? What about resilience? What about if it's crisis and so on? So, reflection regarding the size and board size relation to the responsibilities that are growing. And expectations are growing. We are talking about sustainability and resilience in an OECD, what was not there. But it's expectations that board will manage and ask sustainability-related risks and to advise management also how to see opportunities. How can you do it with 2, 3 board members? Maybe some reflections, and let's start with, you want to start? Yeah,
yeah I want to start. I guess we need to answer, first of all, I mean, why there is a state-owned enterprise. I mean, and there is a different industries which is kind of working in a free market environment where you have a first competition from the private sector. Of course, these companies probably, first of all, we need to answer, I mean, why we have these companies as a state-owned enterprises. And of course, I would advocate that these are probably the industries where the state needs to kind of to privatize these companies as soon as possible and put in the free market, because I mean, state's role is not kind of to compete with the private sector, with the private business, and but taking the circumstances that these companies are still owned by the company, I mean, there should be quite diverse boards with experience in risk management, in strategy, finance, and so on, because, I mean, the role itself, I mean, you are dealing with kind of various aspects of the business and company life, and there, I would say that the good number would be like at least 5 to 7 board members. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the companies operating as a kind of state functions, like, I don't know, water company and I mean, whatever, the electricity or some utilities. I would say that 3 to 4 would be enough, because I mean the business itself is much kind of differently constructed in a way, yeah? And you have different goals to manage and check in that case. So I would say I would start, I mean, asking the question, I mean, why the state is owning this business in the first hand, then trying kind of formulate that one and put the goal that this is not the state were competing with the private sector in the first hand. But if that's the case, then we have this quite diverse, because I mean, usually this is quite a first competition, and you need a quite big skill set in the board to help to grow that business.
Okay, where are you guiding that actually the good advice would be to segment state-owned companies, basically those who are commercial, those who are budget financed, what is fulfilling some social or other policy objectives, and where this competitive environment is, then it's 5-7, what is average OECD practice when we are looking to all jurisdictions, and also recommendation also in Baltics. But where the funding from the state is and where those policy objectives prevails, it's 3-4. Agree? Disagree?
I have a little bit different opinion, because I believe that the number of board members, first of all, should be defined by the size, scope of the company and the industry. So we cannot, like, one size fits all. But generally, if we have, for example, water supply company, but if that company, I don't know, the turnover is like 200 million, I would doubt the 3 members would be capable enough to manage this size and scope of the organization. You also mentioned in the beginning of the question about the increasing scope of the regulation and all the changes, including technology and so on. So I believe that because of that, probably would not be very efficient to enlarge the size of the board members, because we will have like challenges to come up with the, some really well defined and discussed opinion to come up to arrive to same agreement if we, let's say, have 9 board members. I know that in some Benelux countries, they do have large boards. And at the same time, probably they have some challenges to come up with the real efficient board work. So my opinion is that a board can always hire external advisors to advise on AI, on any other question. So in that case, we will have efficiency, limiting the scope of the board members, and at the same time, we will have some required knowledge from the market.
All right. So Erkki, you told yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, fully agree.
Okay, nothing. Okay.
I would like another aspect to this. So the complexity of operations is one angle. Another one is if you are in the capital markets, either with the bonds issues or with IPOs, you have to consider investors' interests as well. And this brings in completely different level of governance for the company. I'm not talking on reporting. I mean the way how the mindset of the company is made and how the processes are run. So, and this next level or this extra mile, it definitely requires different professional level of the board. So this might be one of the triggers to add extra competence in the board team.
Okay. Coming back to this sustainability area, what also EBRD emphasized from the expectation point of view, and just to see opportunities. So the current setup of the board and composition, and suddenly you need somebody with the background or understanding that board can challenge also the sustainability. That is relatively new item in board roles and responsibility list under the OECD. So what to do with that? So are we trying to redraw the board matrix, seeing that if somebody is covering that, not covering that, go to shareholder and saying, hi, sustainability is important, all stakeholders are expecting, we need somebody in boardrooms that is covering this part as well. Are we looking for, at managerial level, some strong persons, and so on and so on. So what to do in this regard?
Yeah, I absolutely wouldn't hire a special person for that, because I think that that's exactly the way of compartmentalizing the topic, is that, okay, there comes John and then he or she is doing sustainability for us. I don't think that's the broad goal here. I don't think that there is any alternative for us, is that both the company as well as the board to really grow into these topics, is that it's not, you know, it's not a narrow finance or something, you know, specific. I think sustainability is a broad topic. So yeah, I mean, not everybody is going to be the deep expert on that, but it's you know, today also is, I mean, you can't run the company and say is that, you know, that only the IT director knows about IT, everybody else is clueless about the technology. It just doesn't work. And not that anybody said that, but I think the sustainability is very much the same topic. I mean, it needs to be broad-based, and so is that I'm not sure how much we need to accelerate that, but I mean, the world does not allow to go without it, so is that I'm pretty sure we're going to grow it in, I mean, throughout the management board as well as throughout the supervisory boards.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, to Erkki, basically the industry itself kind of regulates most of the things, and basically, and that's normally cover a lot of operational aspects. For example, in aviation, I mean, the overall goal by 2050 is kind of carbon neutral or whatever operations. That means, that includes the change of the fleet. That means a change of the fuel the airlines are using, and many other aspects of the sustainability aspect. So. There might be the person who is good with reporting of that when it comes to the, I don't know, annual reports, and but that should be the job for everyone in the company. At least in the management board and different levels below that. Yeah.
Okay. So if we talk on sustainability, so this is much broader one. Actually, I'm talking about the business continuity model, because there are so many changes, either external changes, and the environment is changing. Either it comes from legislation requirements, which is really very specific one to your industry, or either it is coming from investors and the financiers, rational thinking and your risk assessment, or either it comes from value chains and your customers. All that one comes together under ESG and sustainability. And third one, and here if we are, as it was in your presentation, there are so many SOEs who are operating in CO2 intense sectors. So this means that in the eyes of financiers and investors, you are having extremely high transitional risk. What means transitional risk? It means that the need of investments and time in order to adapt to low carbon economy is much, you need to have extra funding and extra time, which we do not have. So therefore, in the eyes of investors, you are having a higher transition risk. We already see in our Baltic capital markets that there are issuers, state-owned enterprises, who are issuing bonds, and the use of proceeds are going to be for transition finance, for shifting of operations from those segments which are not going to be operated as of 2030. This is already happening here in the Baltics. So therefore, sustainability goes together with the strategy and the development of the business. So this is not about sustainable KPIs reporting and gender diversity. This is about complex business operation shift if and when needed.
Okay. But would you say that sustainability is embedded in your company strategies and business models?
Yeah.
There as well? Some was no, yes. Okay, yes, most likely, yes. Okay.
It's an attitude, I would say. It's a focus. And I believe that many, or maybe majority, already have embedded sustainability focus targets and some governance measures. So just adding on what colleagues said, I think that, first of all, board members should be always curious, open to learning, so learning board. We can add to what is strong board, so one more definition. But generally, if just would be one board member who would be kind of responsible for sustainability, it means that only one person is responsible. But it's overall board's responsibility or governance responsibility to really run sustainable business in the long term.
And actually, I wanted the next question to address to you, so you will have opportunity to continue. Yes, because the governance will change in Lithuania soon. So it means that there can be questions how it will be translated to the boards. And first thing, what you told regarding strong board is independent professional. So, and if you are analyzing and deep diving in this independence of SOE boards and to take decisions in the best interest of the company and all shareholders, and as we are aware that there are some political interests, and sometimes it's in benefit of reaching some political ambitions that are discussed in the boardrooms, and not necessarily those interests match with the best interest of the company. So how would you put what mechanisms are in place actually to safeguard that boards of SOEs, where are independent board members, can take independent decisions and independent judgment with all this independent mindset taking into account what you mentioned?
I think you're asking me for a reason. Yes, so indeed, so political cycles, it's something that probably mostly can affect the board work. So starting from the guardrails. So I think that Lithuania has made really good progress in terms of having some already embedded legislation and processes that For example, there is a definition that not less than half board members should be independent. So if we have like 5 members in the board, so 3 of them should be independent. So I think this is already what is working in Lithuania. Then we can move into selection and nomination process. So again, there are some processes that external, like in Finland, for example, so external companies, they are headhunting for the candidates, and there is a committee that is nominating. So generally, the process is already there. I think it works quite well. But it's the same like, we have, for example, some rules how to drive on the street, right? You know that you should not overspeed, you should, park in specific place. But sometimes it happens that people do not obey those regulations, and putting more regulations probably will not help with the situation. So I would say that that soft part that you could not put into regulation and those real safeguards, it's about the maturity of society, maturity of democracy. And it means that, there always can be some conversations, let's say, in the boardroom or next to the boardroom. But I think it's important that we as society, first of all, understand what is democracy, what is values, what is integrity. So this is one thing. And then there is a question how much you are independent really as a board member. Are you independent and strong enough to have those conversations if there is some, let's say, attempt to influence you as an independent board member? So I think it's always, first of all, huge responsibility on each independent board member to be themselves as the safeguards of independence.
And do you have criteria for yourself as an independent board member, which is a limit? So red lamps are beeping all around, and one moment you're saying, no, this is too much.
Okay, so I can share my experience.
No. Yeah.
I can share my experience. So some time ago, I used to be, it was in 2019, I was the member of Lithuanian Post board. And there was a political cycle change. It was after the change, it was a conversation with the new representatives of the shareholder, with the board. And we were asked for some changes in the company management. And the independent board members, we didn't see any reason, any logic behind. And we, as the independent board members, we refused to execute this ask, I would say, and the board was dismissed. So I'm an example that, you should stand the ground professionally, and, times are changing. I'm here as the chair of the Lithuanian Post board. So probably this is the way how we should protect independence.
All right. Erkki, you wanted to
I'm just happened to be in a position of being really thoroughly selected independent in Enefit Green. And thank you or not thank you to the EBRD who has been putting high demands up prior to the IPO. So there are 5 board members, and because Enefit Green is still associated to Estonian Energy, so there are 3 people coming from to the board of Enefit Green coming from the Eesti Energia, and 2 independents. And these 2 independents, I mean, the requirements are quite clear and thorough. So, and I didn't maybe realize or didn't think about it too much, early in the process, but then seeing and actually going, step by step also of these EBRD, I would say, heavy but helpful requirements, much more clarified also to myself is that, I mean, what this role is really expected to be. And it's a lot. And point what I want to make is that, yes, is that when we do choose the independent board members, it's helpful also to be really, really specific what this particular role also entails. So it's not that, that, okay, we just do that from the matrix, that, not conflicted anyway, and so independent, off we go. But rather is that, okay, you have been selected now or proposed to become as an independent board member, this, and this what we actually expect from you, to pay particular attention that, transactions are conducted in arm's length base, etc. And then I think it's really effective. I'm not saying that it's not being done, but I think that the kind of, it's a role of itself, and I think it also should be taken like that. I think also the case what was described by you is that one day maybe we will be in the position is that, when the board of the independent members also is being dismissed, is that at least that there is some kind of communication coming out of that board, what was actually the trigger or so, is that there is a certain feedback mechanism that, the independence was wanted to be compromised or so is that.
Yeah, not only new challenges in the next role, what we can read a lot.
I guess, sorry, Elina. One point, I guess, can we really call the independent board member if he's working for another kind of state-owned or government-owned, for example, management position? And this is, I guess, some gray zone. I mean, especially when these kind of people are working in maybe even under the same ministry kind of umbrella in different positions, and when these tough discussions with the stakeholders kind of comes up, then this is kind of a bit tricky. I mean, are you really independent, or I mean, how you will behave in some certain situations? I think that's the gray zone which is still kind of open. And in Latvia, of course, I guess that with the pool of independent directors are not so big because, I mean, of these restrictions, because you need to declare all your whatever, what your belongings and assets and so on, which is probably okay. But I mean, the question, I mean, how public is that, and how much of the possible applicants kind of doesn't apply for these independent jobs.
Okay, so you were adding that if in cases you have too much to lose, if you're taking independent decision, or you are saying, okay, this time it's absolutely fine. And if I have too much to lose, then the question is are you truly independent or not? But I want to add one more topic, the same, but regarding potential solutions or potential reforms in Baltic countries.
Okay, from my side, I would trigger first independent regulator might be of help. Okay, first of all, letter of expectation. It really helps a lot. And say in Riga Airport, where we do have letter of expectation in place, it really sets the thin border, and it really helps a lot. So really, from practice, very, very efficient solution. The next one is to have independent regulator for tariffs for those SOEs, because that also brings another independence aspect for the business operations. So, and finally, if you are working with international credit rating agencies like S&P and Moody's, then actually in the credit opinions for issuers, there is a very nice wording. This issuer is having, although fully state-owned corporate, it's having very long track record of not interference from state shareholders' perspective. And this is treated as a value, not as a minus. So just point for future.
Okay, let's continue. Stuff is independence, so we have a strong board. Responsibilities are clear, and we are trying to adhere to them. Sustainability is entering the boardrooms as well regarding these independent boards. But from the shareholder perspective, time to time there are questions: how can we know that boards are performing good? And this is discussion, in several industries. Sometimes boards are changed because we need more active board. What does it mean, more active board, and so on and so forth. So what is your expectation, maybe your main points regarding this metrics or evaluation process, how board itself can define and acknowledge that board is performing all the responsibilities, this is done, decisions are taken, and also somehow shareholders and also other stakeholders can have this feeling, let's say. Sometimes it's just a feeling that board is performing great. Any examples from your practice, how it is done, and how you communicate with the shareholders regarding performance of the board on a yearly basis? Who wants to start?
So I can start from Lithuanian example. So generally, I think we had quite a comprehensive process of measuring board performance. So first of all, we'll start with the letter of expectations. So from the shareholder, each state-owned enterprise has the letter of expectations. Then, of course, one more measurement, I think that each SOE has the financial targets that are approved by the government. Then we have the Corporate Governance Center that is monitoring the strategy execution process, and also they're measuring many different perspectives, and they're issuing the governance index. So let's say A+ is the highest index, and D probably is the lowest. So you can measure overall, let's say, your performance as a board. And of course, there is annual self-assessment that is also complementary, and no, this is the way how it is. Can it be done better? I believe yes. The quality of the reporting, disclosure, it always can be done better. But generally, I think the process itself already provides quite good framework how to monitor, how to measure performance. So this is Lithuanian experience.
Quite structured one. Erkki.
Yeah, I'm coming back to the earlier point. To criticality of the chairman, repeating my earlier point is that have a great board members but lousy chairman, you will get not a good outcome. Have a great chairman and average board members, and you will get a well-performing board. So this is one component. Yes, pay really attention in the selection. And also, setting the expectations towards to the chairman. Chairman's work is not 15 or 20% more than the other board members. It's 2 or 3 times bigger than the other board members. And it takes 2 to tango. Is that have also professional owner, of course. So I'm. Very, very happy to see in the principles the upgrade there is the very clear language about towards the ownership unit, professional ownership unit, and further consolidation. I mean, it's a skill of itself. And it's a small country like Estonia, if you chop the ownership topics between 5 or 6 ministries or so, everyone having 1 or 2 companies to look after. You are like a doctor who is visiting or who is seeing a patient once a year. I mean, you are not going to be a good doctor there. So I mean, you need a flow. You need also the volume to work with that. So that is another component. Is that if I look to Estonian recent frictions, I mean they are mostly, I think, in between of the owner and the board. So we can kind of. Boards can always do more. We can keep chopping up, the board work as well. But I think that, where the keys are dropped are between the owner and the board. And right. This is, again, comes back into the criticality of the chairman. Chairman is a really linchpin position here to be in the plate. Yes.
Okay. So the question was maturity of governance,
yes.
Development.
Yeah. Everything starts from the top. Everything starts from the top. Yeah.
So before the questions from the Slido audience, so if you would, as we started, some few keywords regarding strong boards, but some keywords, how do you see the boards in Baltics? What challenges, what developments, important steps to be making to have even stronger boards and greater results?
I would start, I mean, I think the boards has become more kind of professional, and the people working in the boards, I think they are in general good, but the main issue is probably how you frame this relationship between the major shareholder state and the supervisory board. And not only the expectation letter, but I mean, is there any kind of regulation how you kind of frame that relationship? Because I mean, there happens a lot of kind of discussions that for example, a very active shareholder wants kind of more and more information, which even goes kind of into the very operational, whether that is okay or that's not okay. How much I mean the board should be representing the company interests over the shareholders or just the shareholders' interests? I mean, I think we still lack the understanding and the framework of this relationship between the boards and the shareholder. And that might be strengthened. And that's probably also the question about this performance measurement of the boards. When you have that strongly kind of set this foundation laid out, then you also can much easier kind of evaluate that board and board's performance.
So no expectations, no possibility to run this performance assessment. Elin?
I think we here in the Baltics, we have undervalued the benefit of different board committees, like audit committee, like investment committee, because by this one you shift the role. Okay, you should not double or triple. But I mean, there's dedicated board member. Okay, for sure, there are different formats in different jurisdictions, and even here in the Baltics, say, for example, in audit committees, there might be only board members, or there might be only one board member who is dedicated to be based on his professional background and competencies. So, but I mean, the use of those different board committees would really make the process more efficient and easy up resource at the board level, where the board really comes to be together as one unit team.
Of course, it's quite a big challenge to form a committee if you are 2-3 board members, and you need to form a committees from board members only, right? So this is kind of overall understanding globally. So it's kind of
not an audit committee. I mean, in audit committees you can have the independent. Also in the Baltics, I guess. So.
Yeah. So, for example, here in Altum, there is audit committee. So whereas
external.
Yeah, with external one.
And usually we're saying, why you are not putting those people in boardroom to have proper discussions. Okay, future challenges. What do you see?
Yes, I would like to add one more perspective. So I believe that many SOEs, they also have a challenge to have very clear perspective from shareholder on how to balance financial sustainability with the special services, so special public services. There's always a tension to provide perfect special public obligations, but at the same time there's a pressure to be financially sustainable, and somehow that dialogue really it must happen. And I see that this is one of the challenges, that probably constant challenges, that we will still need to work on that.
Right. Final words.
Yeah, I think we actually are in a pretty good progress. Is that and I'm hugely thankful for the work of the Baltic Institute for Corporate Governance, which is, I think, one of the best kind of cross-border undertakings throughout the Baltics now, more than a decade already. 1,000+ people trained, speaking the same language, forming the networks, etc. So yeah, I don't know where we would be without it. So I think that's not the only, but that's not the only factor here. But carrying the flag has had a big role. So I'm actually, and we need to look back. We need to really look that we don't lose what we already have built. As we're discussing here today about the next steps, etc., is that the government in Estonia is discussing with full seriousness about maybe abolishing the nomination committee because it seems not really working or so. So we have some much more basic challenges, before we're thinking about what will be the next steps. Yes.
So back to basics, right? Okay, Erik Sako, our country manager at Estonia, is looking for the questions from the Slido. So Erik, please.
I think this is for all of you. What is the biggest governance challenge you faced and overcome as a board member at an SOE?
Remember about honesty and so on.
Tell us a story.
I think I have shared my challenge already. I will skip.
It will be too long story, so.
I think these challenges are still ahead, at least in my case. So let's see how this plays out.
Ongoing process. Something
well, everybody is lucky when you are having very general response. So.
You can tell about your friend, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So coming back to the role of the professional challenger, this is not easy role, especially for regionally SOEs. I'm not talking on the board where I'm currently, but typically SOEs treat board members as the ones who are just tick unit for procurement process. So approve procurement excess level.
Threshold.
Yeah. So therefore, when you are coming in the company and being as a professional challenger, not turnaround, but challenger, so it really people are confused, so a bit afraid, but as soon as you see this professional catch in between, so it really helps. So, but yeah, this shift towards professional challenger and how to handle this shift, this is quite complicated.
That's it. Okay, now it's. I will choose an easy question, then. Do the panelists think that they have sufficient remuneration currently?
No.
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 What to do, you know?
No, my answer is no, but in the same time there is aspect that sometimes you're ready to be on the board of SOE just because you are investing so much, but the benefit is a society, and then it just comes another angle why you are investing yourself so much in this dedicated task. So not everything is counted by euro in your bank account.
I would say that for less challenging boards, I would say that the remuneration is reasonable. But of course, when it comes that it's not, I mean, takes too much of your time and the effort doing too much of the job, I would say that there should be some premium on that. Yeah.
Okay. So it's usually an answer. It depends, you know.
It was quite no this time. Okay. Why there is reluctance to look for foreign competence from, for example, from EU countries to the supervisory boards of SOEs?
I can start. I have been chair of 3 companies, the bank and the telco and the airline, and I had a privilege to work with the members and nominees from EBRD side, also from the Swedish telco side, and I would really say that usually these are very good, experienced kind of professionals, even not the always employees of that organizations, but I mean the really kind of independent guys with a lot of knowledge, and I think this is the best combination, because I mean these people usually gives you like this outside view from when you just have this Latvian thinking of some of the problems. I mean, I really appreciate that, and I really encourage that would be more actually in Latvian SOEs.
Okay. So adding from my experience, when I was on the supervisory board of Sportland at the Baltic level, so half of the board was international experts. So not experts, but with really very well-see track record, professional level. So, and it really brings completely different pace of development, and yeah, this the pace. So, so therefore, it's just only advantage to have foreigners here also in Latvia, and it would a bit also push up internal competition as well. So, So otherwise we feel like in a bit on a Latvian pool, local one, just from Latvian perspectives. So therefore language should not be a barrier.
Lithuania, I think there is no reluctance. There are many boards with the foreign board members, and I think it really adds a lot of value. And at the same time, well, myself, I worked with the international board member at Lithuanian Post. But generally, I think also when it must be very clearly defined what exactly competences are needed for a specific company, specific board. So if the company operates in the local market, it really, you must have very clear understanding what competences, what exactly you need from the international board member. If you operate internationally, yes, it might make sense, but again, I mean, the international board member itself, it's not like some value. Again, we need to define what exact competences we need from international board member. Then, yes, we have really much, let's say, higher value if we don't have these competences on the local market.
I haven't really seen a reluctance or so, so I can't comment. Is that also have been working with several international boards. I had myself on while executive job, I had extremely international board or so. So I don't recognize the situation. I realize they might be, but I haven't seen basically any reluctance for that.
Thank you. And the last one. Professionally weak and politically impaired shareholders cannot prioritize on goals and letter of expectations. What should be done differently to improve?
Strong ownership unit will not make, I think, miracles, but will help. Will help, you know, consolidate this bit of the playing field, etc. Hopefully, will be a good, not a buffer, but will be kind of the good moderator, helper there as well. So that is, I think, that's the way forward. I mean, we are not going to fix our democracies, or we are not going to fix our politicians. So we need to find a slightly more kind of, you know, technical approach here. And I think again, kind of be bold with consolidating the ownership units. That will not make miracles, but will be a step to the right direction.
One more way is to have a dialogue and really to try to educate and support shareholder with know-how. I think it's also one of the ways how we can improve, because yes, we probably don't have always options to change some systematic challenges, but you can always do your best to educate.
I guess I assume this shareholder expectation letters usually are drafted by the company boards and management, and then is reviewed and approved by the shareholder. But I agree that in Latvian case we had this PKC or state chancellery who is now taking over this. I think there should be some centralized kind of view on this one and some broader discussion, because I mean it still stays at the ministry level sometimes, and there is no enough kind of discussion about that expectations letters.
I think that dialogue brings those 80%, and then this role of centralized coordination unit as state chancellor takes another 20% when needed.
Here comes 80-20 again. Okay, but dude, so let me thank you, Eric, and audience for the questions that were asked. And do you know what is very important for every board meeting?
Minutes.
Yeah, of course, minutes, indeed. So we'll have minutes, I guess, after this agenda. Yes, something else. It starts in time and also ends in time. And our time for panel discussion actually ends now. And what I wish, and really thank you for sharing your experiences and thoughts and also future challenges. I really wish that you overcome all the challenges in your companies where you're serving currently as a board member. I wish you quite big stamina and resilience in stakeholder management process, especially when the state is shareholder to achieve all the goals, and best of success in all the efforts what you're doing also in your private life and other position in other companies. So thank you very much for joining, and the floor goes back to Ritis.
We do applaud ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. you. Thank you.
So how Andres already announced, time for the minutes of the meeting, right? So I believe that everyone had not only the good networking, but also a lot of good new information that you can, and I believe that you will, apply while developing the corporate governance practices in your companies further. So just a few closing remarks from my side. Of course, first, I once again I want to thank the OECD, then the State Chancellery, and Altum, where we are located now, and all the speakers for this opportunity to learn more about the best practices of governing state-owned enterprises. And I thank each one of you for wanting, actually, to learn about it. Because, you know, we can speak a lot, but if it's not, no one is interested or only few are interested, it will not go. So any guidelines can be written, but if there is no one to read them and no one to do the hard work needed to implement them in practice, then it would be just a piece of paper. It is us who have to make sure that the Latvian, Lithuanian, and Estonian state-owned enterprises, and probably municipality-owned enterprises, are governed as effectively as possible and create as much value as possible. One of the thoughts that were shared today, and I want to briefly reflect on, is that the true shareholders of SOEs are not ministers, are our citizens, our people. And this is important to understand for the official shareholders and the companies and their boards. So our citizens should have the trust in these companies, not only for managing billions of euros, but also for fulfilling many crucial functions that we need, that we discussed already today. So we need to grow that trust by setting a standard of excellence that can be trusted. So it's up to the boards, of course, with the management and, once again, the shareholders. And the OECD guidelines, considered to be the global standard, were revised, wanted to keep the bar high, including the areas of professional and active SOE ownership, ensuring a level playing field, disclosure, transparency and accountability, composition and responsibilities of the boards, and sustainability. We are making good progress in some areas, but there is still a lot of to do in other areas. Growing SOEs shareholder competencies, fully entrusting boards with the responsibilities they should have for ensuring an effective functioning of an SOE, and leading other companies by example in sustainability, etc., etc., etc. So let's go and do that. So thank you once again, those that online and here in this nice room. So see you next time. Thank you.